Well, welcome everyone. It's always good to be in Sweden, and it's always good to be sharing information with you in some way. I think I've been coming to Sweden now for the last 6 years, and usually I'm here a couple of times, so I'm sure that many of you watching have been to one of my events, whether it be live, whether it be a webinar, or whether it be a live cast, and welcome back. For those of you that haven't experienced these types of events, welcome. And I'd like to take just a couple of seconds to give you an idea about what really this event is all about. We started these events 6 years ago. And when we started the events, I think we went to, I think it was 11 or 12 countries. And this year, personally, myself, I've been to 22 countries. So you can see that the events have had great impact around the world. And the purpose of the event is about solutions. And what we really strive to do is look at the trends, look at the important concepts that are going on each year. And we try to have a very dynamic format for the content that we're providing. So last year, let's say November timeframe, I sat down and I evaluated what are the hot topics. And throughout this year, of course, we're hovering towards the end of October here. But throughout this year, I've been focusing a tremendous amount on user behavior analytics, which is a machine learning and AI concept that has been brought back into IT so that we can actually see when we're under attack in a much different way. That's actually going to be our first topic today. I've also been focusing on other areas of kind of hot topics around Microsoft and Active Directory. One of them is actually passwords. And the concept of passwords, I think for IT administrators has always been kind of a sore point because we know that users don't utilize passwords correctly. They share passwords, they're not secure. So we have upped the conversation this year around passwords to talk about how they're attacked and how we can secure them better if you're going to maintain passwords. And then also we've had discussions around multi-factor authentication so that you can kind of move away from the password and engage more with a different level of security for authenticating your users. We've also been dabbling in Azure Active Directory, as well as a hybrid Active Directory environment, both from a management standpoint and a security standpoint. So these are some things that we've been focusing on in 2019. And again, I've been touring pretty much the world, trying to evangelize around the concepts and give you solutions as we go through the day. So today we have two topics. And both of those topics are going to be somewhat loosely tied together. The first one, as I said, we're going to talk about insider threats, insider attacks specifically, and how you can set up SIM solutions. And with the attachment of UBA, user behavior analytics, how we can actually see better when we're under attack. Then we're going to move on and we're going to talk about cleaning up Active Directory. And we're going to talk about cleaning up Active Directory obviously from an efficiency standpoint, but more from a security standpoint. I'm going to give you some ins and outs on how to do it, why you should do it, and basically at the end of the 90 minutes, you're going to have a list of things that you can actually go do in your live environment. So I'm going to be showing you all that information live. I hope this is a very educational environment for you. As you see on my slide, that is my email address, and I do encourage you to email me at any time. Many of you email me now with questions, but don't be shy. Please don't worry about any language barriers, and I will do the best that I can to help you in your environment. Just to kind of give you a little bit more information about me, especially those that have never met me before. Again, my name is Derek Melber. I am the Chief Technology Evangelist for the Active Directory team at ManageEngine. And what does that mean? Well, that means I get the opportunity to travel the world. As I said, I've traveled extensively this year and really for the last 5 years. I think the greatest thing for me is I get to meet some amazing administrators, whether it be in an event like this. I do live events, I go to trade shows, I meet with customers in their environment, and it allows me to learn about what their needs are. And I can also take that information and share it with you. So you may actually get a flavor of that today. I've had some really interesting conversations this week with many different companies here in Stockholm. And I've learned quite a bit, and hopefully I can share some information with you about maybe design or security or some different things that they're doing that can help you as well. I am an MVP, as Marcus mentioned. I've been an MVP both in Active Directory and in group policy. Today I'm an enterprise mobility MVP. Not too sure what that means, but I deal primarily with Active Directory, both Azure Active Directory and on-prem Active Directory and everything that comes with it, group policy, security, and management. There are quite a few people that I work with at Manage Engine that put content together. And what I want to do is I want to give you some guidance on where you can get some additional content. We do only have an hour and a half together this morning. So when we're done, I want to be able to give you something that you can actually go and look at. So if you jump to our web page, manageengine.com, and the first thing that I want to point out to you is if you come over here to company and you look at our blogs, we try to blog pretty much every single week. And on our blog, you'll notice that it is a tremendous amount of information in one spot. So my suggestion to you is that you come over here to the search and you can actually do searches on certain words that you're looking for. So you can get very dedicated information related to the subject that you're looking for through our blog. And again, we try to blog every week. A couple of key points about every single blog. You'll notice that there is a time to read through the blog. That'll never be more than 5 minutes. I value your time. I know you're busy. So I really don't want to eat up a bunch of time with you reading. What I want to do is I want to give you a small nugget of information that you can actually go do something with. So that's the second key point, which is our blogs are action oriented. So we try to make sure that you can do something after you read the blog. So please come take advantage of them. Many times, if I get a question in a webinar, seminar, through email, I will take that question and write a blog about it to give you some information on it. So this is definitely a resource that is built for you. Another resource that's built for you back on our main landing page is if you hover over products this time and you go to the bottom of the page, you'll see this security hardening for Active Directory. This page was built a couple of years ago, and the page was built really as a response to some technology that Microsoft was releasing. And that technology is still available today. More and more organizations are evaluating the technology specifically to be used in a hybrid Active Directory environment. Those two technologies include JIT, just in time, and GIA, just enough access. But I'm going to be honest about these technologies. What I'm finding is that organizations aren't jumping to these very quickly. I've been asking live at my live events, administrators that are using these technologies, and I've been asking for 4 years now. And you have an idea of how many people I'm in front of with the number of countries I've been to, and I'm still stuck at 5. 5 in 4 years that have actually implemented these technologies. So it isn't mainstream. So I didn't really think it was going to be mainstream when I saw the technologies years ago. So we built this website. And if you come to the bottom of this website, you're going to see all of these blue bars. And you'll notice that each blue bar has a topic related to security. And if you click on one of those, maybe you want to look at Active Directory groups, you will see that there are dedicated blogs and videos to guide you on how to secure that part of your environment. So really the site is built for you. It's dedicated for administrators to guide them through how to secure their environment. So I encourage you to come take advantage of the information that's available to you. Again, it's built in a content way that is guided to allow you to be efficient as you go through the information. Now, I am pretty excited to show you one more piece of content. This one is only about a month old. And what we decided to do is take all of our blogs, all of our videos that we've built over the last 6 years and organize them for you. So instead of you having to sift through to find them, we gave you a site that you can quickly find what you want. So if you hover over products and you come to the bottom next to security hardening, you'll see that we now have Active Directory Academy. And the Active Directory Academy is organized in a little bit different way, but it's built for you so that you can find information. So nearly everything that we have put together over the last 6 years is on this site. And we're pretty excited about it because I think we've built some amazing content, and it allows administrators to come into a place where they feel comfortable. They know they're going to get quality information, and it's very easy to maneuver through this to get the information that you need. So I encourage you to come in, take a look, see some things, maybe some tidbits that are going to make you more efficient, maybe some tidbits that are going to make you more secure, to allow you to do more with what you have in your environment. So those are some resources that we have available to you. And again, all of that information is free. And what I mean by free is you don't have to put any information about you into a form to get the information. It's just freely available to you. One more thing I want to talk about is my email address. I mentioned earlier my email. Please email me with questions. It allows me to learn. It allows you to maybe get answers to the things that you need. As an MVP, I know other MVPs. I rely heavily on them to get answers. So please take advantage of a resource that you can get answers to your Windows questions. So I think that kind of gets us through the intro. So let's jump into our first topic. And our first topic is focusing on insider attacks. And what I want to do is I want to start from the ground up. And I want to start with a foundation that allows us to understand why and how we can actually look for inside attacks. So let's talk about the why first. Why do we need SIMs, and why do we need UBA, user behavior analytics, with insider attacks? Well, I believe the reason is because we are being attacked successfully, and the inlets to our environments are too open. Now, let's have this discussion around this graphic. This is a graphic that I obtained from Microsoft a couple of years ago at Microsoft Ignite. And this is Microsoft's view of an attack on Active Directory. So this isn't some third party talking about an attack on Active Directory. This is Microsoft's view. Now, when we really sit down and look at an attack, there has to be a breach in some way initially. So when we think about this, what is breached initially? Well, I'm thinking that our domain controllers won't be the first computer that's breached. I'm thinking that a server typically isn't the first machine that's breached. And most of you are already thinking and saying, many of you, well, it's your workstations. It's your end users' workstations, either through email, maybe they've clicked on a banner ad in some internet site, who knows what it is, but that's where we're breached. So Microsoft agrees with that, and they'll say, as you notice right here on the slide, the first host is compromised. Now, before the first host is compromised, all of this green area is when the attacker is doing reconnaissance work on your environment. They're going to your social media pages, both for the company as well as for C-level and the administrators. They're going and gathering information so they know exactly where to attack your environment. And then once they actually attack your environment successfully, according to Microsoft, once one computer in your environment has been breached, it only takes 1 to 2 days, 24 to 48 hours, to actually get domain admin credentials. Now, that's not a pleasant thought. That means that if one of your employees does something foolish on their computer, on the internet or through email, to allow someone to take control of that computer, within 2 days, that attacker is a domain admin. So that's a problem. It's a big problem. So my first action item for you today is I want you to secure your endpoints. You got to secure your endpoints. Don't forget to secure your endpoints. And I know that many of us are just worried about making sure our endpoints are functioning, and if they malfunction, we have a way to get them back running. And that is important, but we also have to make sure that we secure those endpoints. And we're going to actually talk about this a little bit more around the insider attack world that we're going to jump to. But to be honest, the 24 to 48 hours isn't the really bad number that Microsoft is providing for us here. The really bad number is that once an attacker has domain admin credentials, it takes us as administrators and as an organization over 150 days to realize that we were breached. That's not a pleasant thought. I mean, think about it. If you're the attacker, if you, with your knowledge, could go into an organization for 150 days, over 5 months, what couldn't you do in 5 months? Well, you could do anything as a domain admin. So this is really where we need to target securing our environments. But how real is this? I mean, what's the reality of these numbers and what Microsoft is presenting here? Well, let's talk about the first use case. The first use case I want to talk about is Marriott. Marriott was breached in 2014. It took Marriott until 2018 to realize they were breached. Now, this isn't 150 days. This is 4 years. So when we look at the reality of breaches and us being able to determine whether or not we were breached, it can be very difficult. I mean, Marriott's a very large organization. They have a lot of computers, a lot of servers, a huge infrastructure. So it makes sense, but it's part of our job to do it as well. Now, 2014, 2018, that's old news, right? Let's talk about a breach that's more recent. Let's talk about the Capital One breach. The Capital One breach was actually exposed in the midsummer. So it was exposed, I think it was in the May, June, July timeframe. And the exposure of this was really strange. Now, before we get to the actual details of the breach, which some of you hopefully know about, let's talk about the largest financial breach ever, which occurred this year, okay? During this breach, as it says on my slide, 100 million credit card applications were discovered and found. 6 million credit cards in Canada alone were discovered. 140,000 social security numbers and 80,000 bank account numbers. But if you actually do a little bit of research on this, this breach didn't start in 2019. It actually started back in 2016. So this was a breach that actually went on for quite a while, and Capital One never knew about it until the summer of 2019. Okay? This is the largest financial breach and the 5th largest overall breach in history that occurred this year. Now, why do I keep focusing on this year? Well, how many of us have been focusing on security for the last 3-4 years? And you would think that these breaches would get smaller and they would go away. But instead, they're getting bigger and becoming more common practice, which is why I'm having this discussion with you. Now, if we look at some of the details around this, Capital One had a response. So out on the internet, Capital One responded to everything that was going on. And this is directly from the internet of what Capital One posted. I want you to really look at the details here. It says, no bank account numbers or social security numbers were compromised, other than these 140,000 and 80,000. So you can see that Capital One is trying to, with words, convince us it really wasn't a breach. Nothing was taken. It's okay. But in reality, it isn't okay. It was a major breach. They're just trying to, take focus off of the fact that so much information was taken. Now, what actually happened? What actually happened was an employee at the cloud service that Capital One was using, found a hole in a firewall configuration and took advantage of that. And through that, we're able to get elevated privileges, and through the elevated privileges, be able to go in and get the information. So this was a misconfigured firewall that opened up the world to this attacker. Now, this particular attacker, her name, she was a, I think, 32-year-old woman who worked at Amazon Web Services, Mrs. Thompson. She was the one that went in and did all of this information gathering. But it wasn't actually Capital One that discovered the breach. So what happened was, around March timeframe, some of the attacks occurred, some of the most prevalent attacks occurred. And then in June, the attacker started to post stuff on the internet. I have all this information. What do I do with it? Someone else, like you or me, another admin that wanted to do good, actually alerted Capital One of this information. 2 days later, Capital One discovered, yes, we were breached. That woman now has gone to court and been sentenced hundreds of thousands of dollars and years in jail. But we're not done yet, because the actual breach of Capital One is the tip of the iceberg. Early in June, it was being discussed on whether or not more companies were breached during this breach. Come to find out, there are more. We don't even know how many more. Companies like Ford, Vodafone, these are also included in the breach. Basically, the woman used the same code to scour through the cloud looking for vulnerabilities, and when they were found, she exposed them, got privileged elevation, and then got information. So this is still under investigation, and we don't know. Still today in 2019. So what can we do? What can we do to go and make sure that we in our environments have the best of what we can have in order to know when we're under attack? This is going to include a couple of things. One is you're going to have to do some cleanup. Plus, you're going to have to do some security checks. And you're going to have to go in and start to evaluate what you have in your environments. So let's first of all talk about what a SIM can do for you to help you find attacks. Now, I've had discussions with many different companies this week here in Sweden, and the discussions that I have with companies throughout the world, I think most medium and certainly all large organizations have a SIM solution: security, information, and event management. And what I'm finding is that most organizations aren't using their SIM solution correctly. They're using it for monitoring and forensics. They're not using it for information to you, the administrator, in real time. So what can we do? I want to give you some real things that you can do with your SIM immediately when we're done, so you can know when you're under attack. All right? Let's look at some different areas of your environment. I want to first talk about local groups. That's right. We're going to go to your endpoint. So I'm going to jump over here to my endpoint. And this here is just a normal desktop. It's a Windows 7 desktop. Of course, I probably need to upgrade this because I'm going to lose support for it soon, but that's beside the point. If I come in here and I log on to my desktop, at this point I'm logging on as an admin so I can show you some things. If I were to go to this endpoint's local SAM, so I'm going to come over here to the local security accounts manager, and here I have a built-in group, administrators. We're all familiar with this group. Here's my next action item for you. This is what I suggest you do when we're done, right? I suggest that you pick 20 workstations at random. Just pick 20, okay? And I want you to go to the local administrators group on those workstations, and I want you to evaluate if the members are correct. It's that simple, okay? Now, who should be in this group? Well, in my opinion, domain admins could or should be in this group. That way we can remotely administer, we can do things that we need to do as an admin. And also the local administrator should be in this group. Okay, those are the two. Who else? I don't think anybody else. Certainly the user of the computer should not be in the local administrators group. But when you go and investigate these 20 computers, you may find results like this, where there's groups in there, there are users in there that absolutely should not be in that group. So the question is, one, how did they get there? Two, what am I going to do moving forward? Well, this is where the SIM solution comes to play. Because what I'm going to suggest you do is you go clean up all of your groups, clean them up, and then you monitor them. So think about it this way. If all of your workstations have the correct group membership and administrators, and only an admin can modify them, but your SIM emails you and tells you that someone was just added to the local administrators group on a workstation, what does that mean? It means you're under attack. Somehow, some way, someone put a user in the local administrators group. This is that breach. This is, if we go back to that timeline, this is the first computer that's breached. So if we receive an alert that we have an entry into a local administrators group on an endpoint, we can take action. We can actually stop someone from getting into the domain admins within a day or two. But you have to have this set up. How difficult is that? It's not difficult at all. Here in my environment, I can go to my SIM, right? So I'm going to come over here to my SIM, and you will see in my SIM that I have a dedicated report and alert set up to where if someone is added to the local administrators group, right? Recently added members to groups. And if I haven't done it in the last 24 hours, but I certainly can go back and look in history, this would be your forensics piece. I can go and look to see when this group changed. Of course, the SIM has alerts. If someone is added to the group, I'm alerted. So now what I can do is I can see my endpoints. And I don't want to limit endpoints to workstations here. It can also be your servers, right? Because they're just at the endpoint. They have a local SAM, just like your workstations. And the membership of the local administrator shouldn't change much there either. So if you receive an email or a text, however you want to receive the alert, indicating that one of these groups changed memberships and they shouldn't change, you can take immediate action. It's just a shift in our thinking, making sure that we are leveraging what we have in the environment, which we already have a SIM, so that we can see when we're under attack. But I don't want to limit it to local groups, okay? We also need to worry about groups in Active Directory. So which groups do we need to worry about? Well, let's jump over here to Active Directory users, computers, and let's categorize some groups, right? So first, I want to talk about our built-in privilege groups: domain admins, enterprise admins, schema admins, administrators. There's probably about 20, a little over 20 of these groups. Jot those down, write those down, document those. Next, we have what I call service and application groups. This would include, for example, maybe a SQL server group or an Exchange group or some third-party application group. When the application's installed, it puts groups in Active Directory, and those groups manage that application. Those are privileged groups. Then we have other types of groups that I call custom. These would fall under the area of like master admins or ME admins for Manage Engine. These are groups that we create. We like the name, and we normally put these groups in other privileged groups so that we can easily control names of groups that we like. Document all of these. Now, once you have them documented, you monitor and alert for changes. Right? I mean, it's very difficult to know if someone adds someone to a group. I'm sure that most of you watching today, you're not the only one that can modify Active Directory. You work with others that can do that as well. Well, you don't sit right next to them to watch them. You don't get an email from them before they make a modification. So you need to know when these groups are changing membership. And if none of you actually made the change and an attacker made the change, you need to be notified in real time. We should not be notified of a change to one of these privileged groups in an audit. That's not when we want to find out. So what does this look like? Well, I'm going to take all of these groups and I'm going to put them in my SIM solution. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the ability to monitor when privileged groups are modified. What does this look like? If someone comes into Active Directory and they modify one of these groups, so let's say that someone goes in and they add someone to the group. As soon as they hit OK, my SIM solution recognizes that. My SIM is gathering information from domain controllers in real time and letting you know in real time as well. So now when I go back and I actually look at what's happening, I will see that I have an entry that someone was added to the group. Your phone is vibrating right now telling you that someone was added to the group. This is where we need to live. And what I have found throughout this year, focusing on this throughout the world, is less than 5% of administrators have this set up. You have a SIM to do it, just go set it up. We need to know when things are changing in the environment. This is a requirement in order for us to keep track of security. It also gives us an indication of attack. We know when we're under attack when things like this are occurring. So these are things that we need to look at. Now, what else do we need to look at? I think we need to also look at logons. Now, normally when I mention logons to administrators, you immediately think about your end users and you're like, I don't want to track anything with their logons because it's all over the board. But I don't want you to worry about your end users right now. I want you to worry about your account, okay? Now, many of you go to trade shows. Many of you during the summer take holiday leave. Let's think about those two environments. When you're at a trade show, if you were to receive an email that your user account had a failed logon back at the office, what does that mean? It means your account's under attack. It's that simple. How many of you actually have it set up to receive alerts when your account has a failed logon? I've asked that question in all of my environments this year. Less than 5% have that set up. But when you think about it, it is an essential knowledge to know when your account is under attack. Actually, I think you should set up all of the admins to know when they're under attack. Because if your colleague, who's also a domain admin, is on holiday and you're working, you'll want to know if their account is under attack so you can take action. So these are things that we as administrators need to set up so we can control security. And that is super simple inside of a SIM solution. I have in my SIM solution all of these alerts set up to where I know when certain things are going on. So here I have IT staff failed logons. And when I have a failed logon from an IT staff, I'm notified. Maybe you want to do this for other privileged users in your environment that you know shouldn't have that many failed logons. And when there is one, we just need to make sure that it isn't an attack and it's a legitimate failed logon. These are some things that we can set up, all right? And this gives us a 100% indication of an attack if that is occurring. The other benefit of doing this in a SIM is I can narrow it down to certain groups so that I can actually only look for failed logons of certain users that are in certain groups. For example, domain admins, enterprise admins, schema admins. Because usually we don't have that many failed logons for these types of accounts. So the actual false positives are going to be reduced as well, which is an important aspect of any SIM and getting alerts from that SIM. So that's another area that I think is important, okay? Now, how about users? Do we want to receive an alert every time a user fails to log on? Of course not. But what about receiving an alert every time that a user fails to log on 3 or more times in less than a minute? That's important. We want to know that. That's called a threshold. And I guarantee your SIM supports thresholds. So if we evaluate what we need to look at from a security perspective, an attack perspective. And we can actually create alerts in our SIM that is going to give us better information. We reduce the false positives, and all of the alerts that we receive are clear indications of an attack, and we don't receive very many of them at all. So now we're reducing the alerts and making the alerts that we do receive absolutely crystal clear. Okay? These are some concepts I want you to think about, and I want you to extrapolate. Okay? Let's extrapolate immediately from what we're talking about. Let's talk about your service accounts. With regard to your service accounts, the concept of a service account is actually very simple. I have a user account. The user account is configured to help run an application or a service to authenticate the application and communicate with other servers with that application. It's really simple. Almost every service account, when installed, needs elevated privileges. So these are important. We need to control them. How do we control them? Let me give you a couple of tips. First of all, I find that most organizations do not know where their service accounts are configured. So let me help you with that step first. We actually built a solution about 6 years ago when I came to the organization and put it into our AD Manager free toolkit. So this is absolutely free. And you'll notice that here we have service account management. And if you come to your service accounts, you can select all of your Windows servers. And then once you've selected them, you go and get the service accounts from all of those servers. Okay? It uses the credentials. You see that right here. And it will bring back for you all the service accounts that are running on all of those servers. You'll notice that some of these are actually kind of built in and you don't really control them much. So we gave you a filter just to look for users. Pretty cool. Now you can document all of your Windows service accounts. The next step is to monitor them and get alerts when they change. So we're going to go back into our SIM and we are going to create an alert and a report for when service accounts change somewhere. I don't think I have an alert, but watch this. I have a report set up for this. So if a service account changes, I am notified. That's pretty cool. So which means if someone goes into Active Directory in any way, however this occurs, PowerShell, another command, a command line option, anything, and they toggle, good or bad, any service account, that information is immediately available here. So I am monitoring when service accounts are modified. So here, my service account management, you will see that on this day, that was modified. You can also set it up for an alert to where you're alerted for this. This is essential for you to know when things are changing. Now, I met with an organization earlier this week that is trying to clean up service accounts. This is one way to do that. You know when service accounts are modified. You can also set up alerts for when service accounts authenticate. We're going to talk about that in our next section. Okay, so I don't want to jump ahead too far here, but what I'm showing you are some different things that you can actually leverage your SIM for. But let's be honest, SIM solutions can only go so far. And SIM solutions do have limitations. And basically the limitations that SIMs have today is they do a poor job of tracking what I call allowed attackers. What's an allowed attacker? Well, an allowed attacker is someone in your environment that you have given access privileges to, and the SIM doesn't know when they leverage the access in a good way or bad way. They just utilize the access. So, for example, let's say that you give someone in finance access to all finance information because when they were hired 3 years ago, you were told to put them into the finance group. Well, they work in accounts payable, but finance has access to accounts payable and receivable. So that means this user has access to accounts receivable, even though they shouldn't because they only work in accounts payable. See the problem here? And it's company-wide, and it's every company in the whole world has this particular issue. So how do we tell the difference between someone that has access correctly and doesn't have access? Well, your SIM doesn't really delineate between that. It doesn't understand when someone is accessing something correctly or not. Real world example, Jeffrey Snowden. He's actually been in the news quite a bit over the last month. But Jeffrey Snowden falls into this category. Jeffrey Snowden was a U.S. employee at a government agency and had access to information that he shouldn't have had access to. He took the information and posted it on WikiLeaks. There you go. So that is a real world example of someone that had too much access, but the SIM solution couldn't see when they were accessing stuff in a malicious manner. But this is where UBA comes in, user behavior analytics. And what UBA can do is it can help you see when users are behaving differently than normal. And the way it does it is it creates what's called a baseline. So a baseline is nothing more than the user's normal behavior over time, right? So for example, log on time. I'm going to guess that most of your employees, if you were to look over the last 6 months, their log on time is give or take 10 minutes of 8 o'clock, right? Access to files. I'm going to guess that most of your employees only access a handful of files every day. So that might be 20 files or maybe 40 files, but they access the same files every day on average. That's called a baseline. Now, I can actually look at baselines inside of user behavior analytics. Now, user behavior analytics is nothing more than an extension to a SIM. It is evaluating your SIM data in a different way. So this is my SIM. This is my user behavior analytics. And I can come down here and look at normal behavior. Let's look at Derek. What is Derek's normal behavior? Maybe I want to look at the usual computers that Derek accesses. So I come in here. You will notice that it just taps into Active Directory. I pick my Active Directory user, and I see which computers Derek accesses. And you will see here that Derek accesses Server 100 and Windows 7. Pretty basic, right? I mean, it's just a baseline of the computers that Derek accesses. I could also look at the volume of files, the time of the access, the time of the logons. All of these things are in the SIM, and UBA produces from that volume of information these baselines per user. So every user has their own baseline per area of investigation. Pretty simple. Okay, so how do we leverage this? Well, what we do is we look for anomalies. Anomaly is a very critical word in the UBA world. Okay, an anomaly is when a user behaves different than what they have over time. So for example, let's say that one of your employees, instead of logging on at 8 a.m., logs on at 2 a.m. in the morning. Well, that's kind of strange. They've never done that, and all of a sudden they log on at 2 a.m. UBA will send you an alert telling you this user logged on in a time that was radically different from their normal logon time. Okay? We also can look for other behaviors that are an indication of an attack. One of those is something called a password spray attack. Now, you may be thinking password spray attacks, it happens every now and then, but how prevalent is it? You'll see here at the bottom, I actually pulled this up about 4 months ago from LinkedIn. This was a post on LinkedIn from someone giving everyone in their LinkedIn world a link to a password spray attack tool right there on LinkedIn. They didn't have to think. Someone may not even been thinking about this, and all of a sudden now they can. So what if someone in your environment downloads this and does a password spray attack in your environment? Now, what's a password spray attack? A password spray attack is when someone gets a hold of your list of users, and then they take that list and try one password per user, trying to see if the common password for the organization is still set for one of those users. Now, this is only one failed logon per user. We just had a discussion 5 minutes ago that you don't want to track failed logons per user. You only want to look at thresholds of 3 or more. So your SIM is not going to recognize this. But watch my SIM. My SIM is set up with user behavior analytics. And with user behavior analytics, I can look at logon activity, unusual volume of logon failures for a host, and you will notice that it even describes for me what it's looking for, and I can look at the details. The details prove this is a password spray attack. The logons occur within a short amount of time from the same machine, but totally different users. Your SIM can't do this without user behavior analytics. But with user behavior analytics, it opens up a brand new area, not just with logons, but for administrative access, for file access, for a variety of different areas, giving you insight for when users do things that they've never done before. Now, UBA is somewhat of a newer technology, and UBA has different levels. Another solution that we have in place is with a different SIM that we have, and the different SIM that we have actually allows you to look beyond that. Now, this is a solution called UEBA, User and Entity Behavior Analytics, the same concept, but instead of just looking at user behavior, it's looking at the behavior of a device, firewall, router, computer, printer, whatever it is, okay? And you will notice that I have a risk score. Well, what's the risk score? Well, earlier when I was talking about anomalies, they were just individual anomalies. But what if a user is attacking the computer in different ways? So they're accessing files, they're logging on at a different time, they're touching files they've never touched before, all in a short amount of time. Well, obviously, those would be individual anomalies, but UEBA goes in and groups them together and gives that user an overall risk score. The more anomalies, the higher the risk. So you'll see that I have a couple here that are actually in a high risk category. This user has 44 anomalies in a short amount of time. So now what I can do is I can go to that user, see obviously there's different areas of risk, but I want to know what the user is doing, so I can come in here and look at the details. And I know exactly what UBA is digging out of your SIM data to display to you, to tell you, you might want to go take a look at this because your user is doing things they've never done before. Your users don't access the registry. Your users don't modify file permissions. But in this case, they are. And they've never done it before. And they're doing all of this at the same time. Sounds a little fishy to me. So this is where you can leverage user behavior analytics for both users and devices to scour through your existing SIM data to give you additional information that are indications of attack. So these are solutions that are available today. And again, they allow us to see areas that are very difficult to see otherwise. All right? So that gives us some things to think about. I think it also gives us some areas that you can immediately go into your existing SIM and you can set up things so you can see more and be alerted to when these things are occurring. I think it's extremely valuable and critical that you evaluate that and you actually do that in your existing environment, okay? And again, you're gonna find that certain installations of analytics, behavior analytics, do a little bit different thing. Ours do a little bit different based on Active Directory and based on everything else, right? The Log360 Yuba that I just showed you, that's available in our Log360 solution that can look at over 500 different devices. So UEBA can look at over 500 different types of devices, not 500 devices, types of devices, so that you can actually see when things are happening on these devices that have never happened before. Very difficult for your SIM to do that. Very easy when you plug in UBA to your SIM, it just starts to show you that information. Okay? Excellent. So in this first session that we've covered, we're talking about insider attacks. I think it was pretty obvious that we are under attack. Marriott, Capital One. I don't want to pick just on those two, but those are some of the two of the biggest, most recent attacks. These organizations didn't know they were under attack. They didn't know they were breached. Not for 150 days, but for even longer than that. So we need to have solutions in our environment so that we know when we're under attack. And that's when we jumped into your SIM and we looked at a variety of different things. Hopefully some of those areas that I showed you with regard to local groups, privileged groups in Active Directory, your account, service accounts, those are some areas that you can immediately go and implement. And now you have a better, more fine-tuned vision of what's going on in your environment. You can also plug in UBA and see even more with your SIM. So that was our first session. Now what I want to do is I want to jump to our second session, which is more dedicated to cleanup of Active Directory. And just like we did in the last session, where we started off talking about foundational concepts, I want to do the same thing here. So instead of just jumping in and talking about what to clean up, let's have a discussion about why you need to clean it up. And I'm sure that most of you understand the foundational concepts of cleanup of Active Directory, but let's make sure that we kind of think out of the box. So why do we need to clean up Active Directory, and why is it so important? Well, first of all, if let's say, for example, our organization has 5,000 employees, but for some reason, Active Directory has 8,000 user accounts. Having all those additional user accounts just clutters things up. It masks what we're really truly focused on. Some organizations have what I call group bloat. And group bloat is the idea that if someone can create a group, they're going to create groups. And the group may be empty, but now instead of having maybe 10,000 groups that are critical, now we have 25,000 groups, and 10 are critical and 15,000 maybe aren't used anymore, might be empty. So I think we need to go clean them up more from just an efficiency standpoint. But we also have to think about backup and restore. Our infrastructure might have different backup and restoration solutions. Some are for disaster recovery, but I'm hoping that you also have solutions in your environment which are more dedicated to day in and day out activity. Instead of being a complete disaster, what if you write a PowerShell script and the PowerShell script messes up 1/10 of your user base? How are you going to know which 1/10 is messed up? Well, that's very difficult to match that with a disaster recovery tool because it just doesn't work that way. What you need is a middle piece to restore quickly, maybe even just the attributes of the objects that were modified. Okay, so I want you to investigate that from a cleanup perspective as also from a usability perspective. AD Manager Plus, as some of you probably have AD Manager Plus, just added in the last month, backup and recovery. So it actually has this attribute level recovery now for all the objects in Active Directory. You can see them with a couple of clicks. You now restore what the old attribute was without having to go into your disaster recovery tool and dig deep and to try to find all those objects. That's an example of what I'm talking about in terms of space, clutter, and getting more efficient. But we also have areas of attack, and this is mostly what I want to talk about in cleanup. Active Directory hasn't changed in 19 years, on-prem Active Directory. Sure, we've had some changes, but because there hasn't been radical changes, the attackers know how we administer Active Directory. They know what we do good, they know what we do bad. And the attackers know what commands to run to find the information to discover where we have failed to secure and clean up Active Directory. And they're going to go after those particular objects and accounts in order to gain access into our environment. So it is my thought that we need to clean up Active Directory in order that we can reduce the attack surface of where an intruder, inside or out, can actually get into our Active Directory environment. So let's break this down into different object types for our cleanup. And I'm going to start off with group policy. And we're going to do efficiency as well as security with group policy. And first of all, we need to know when empty GPOs are there, because empty GPOs, whether they're linked or not, don't do anything. I mean, if I don't have a setting in a group policy object, even if I have it linked to every organizational unit, it doesn't do anything. It's empty. When we create GPOs, group policy objects, they are, in fact, empty. So I'm going to come over here to my group policy management console and say, for example, that I come here to an OU and I create and link a GPO, and there's my new GPO. Obviously, this new group policy object, I can see right here, but how do I know if it's empty? Well, I think it's pretty easy, and even if you have 100 GPOs, you can come through, set settings as the default tab, and just scroll through your GPOs to know which ones are empty. So here's one that's empty. Whether it's linked or not, it doesn't matter. You could delete this and nothing is going to change in your environment. Absolutely nothing, okay? The one that I just created here, as you can see, is also empty. So you can go in and clean up your GPOs for your empty GPOs and nothing is going to occur. Now, many of us have the philosophy in Active Directory, really anywhere on our corporate network, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. So if we have empty GPOs and we delete it, could something happen? Absolutely it could, right? Let me give you an example. Let's say that I have a GPO that I go and look at this second and it's empty. And then all of a sudden in 5 minutes I go and I look and it has settings in it. What happened? Well, maybe it's a script, maybe it's PowerShell, maybe it's some other type of application that you have that can update GPOs. I could have that. It's rare. GPOs really don't work that well in a dynamic nature. So it's not that often that you have these types of settings that are being this dynamic, but that could happen. I don't think really it is happening, but again, you're going to have to evaluate, but I do encourage you to go and clean up group policy for your GPOs that are in fact empty. Now, what else do we need to do with GPOs? Well, non-linked GPOs. Okay, now let's look at the other side of the coin. I could have GPOs that have 1,000 settings, but if they're not linked, they're not doing anything. If a GPO is not linked, nothing is occurring. Well, this is where you can actually leverage different solutions to investigate what you're looking for. So for example, here, I'm going to come into AD Manager Plus, which allows me to run reports on my live Active Directory environment. So I'm going to look at the reports of group policy, and here with one click, I can look at unused GPOs. These are GPOs that you can see aren't linked. If they aren't linked, they're not doing anything. They may have settings there, but they're not doing anything. Now, what do you do with these group policy objects? This has a little bit different result in my opinion. What I would do is I would probably come in here and I would disable the user in the computer portion. Why wouldn't I delete them? You never know. You never know what a GPO is set up for. And if someone went through the time to configure the settings in a GPO, maybe it needs to be used. Maybe once a year for cleanup of a system, maybe once a year for ensuring that security is set, maybe once a year for configuring an application in finance for end-of-year reconciliation. I don't know what it's doing, but this is a way where you can protect the GPO by disabling the settings. If it is linked, nothing happens. So you can do different things with your group policy objects depending on what you want to clean up and what your overall goal is. What else can we do with group policy objects? Well, conflicting settings across multiple GPOs. This is a more difficult one. Someone mentioned this to me in the last month. That's why I have it on the slide. And they said they were going to go through and they were going to clean up group policy. And one of their concerns was settings in different GPOs that toggled the setting back and forth. And I thought about that for a minute. And first of all, there aren't very many tools that look for conflicting settings. For those tools that do show you conflicting settings, they're just going to look for GPOs in general, not GPOs that are in the line of application for objects. So how are you going to clean those settings up? And why? If the end result on your target computer is correct, does it really matter if there are conflicting settings? The end result is correct. Well, I thought about this, and in my mind, as an old GPO MVP or group policy MVP, I thought probably the most important thing is if there's an incorrect setting which is causing delays in application. This is probably one of the most important aspects, because the application of policy can become cumbersome. And what we want to do is we want to clean that up. We want to make sure that the user is getting their desktop in the most efficient time possible. Very funny this morning, I was watching some news, and there was an official in Great Britain that was bragging, or maybe complaining, I couldn't tell, that her computer took 17 minutes to boot up. So that's kind of a negative time frame. So group policy can actually cause minutes of delay, where normally it could be a second, it can push it out to minutes. How can we discover these areas? Well, let me show you some inner parts of logging that's happening already on your systems that you can actually discover this. When I wrote my last book on group policy, I spent a tremendous amount of time evaluating this part of your logs. So if you come into Event Viewer and you go to your application and services logs under Microsoft, Windows, and then you come down here to group policy, you will see that you have an operational log in group policy. And the operational log has basically when policy applies, the details around that. So if I come in here and I look at information, you will see that the group policy environment extension took 234 milliseconds. As I go through, you see more and more time-related settings. So this one took 0 kilobytes. This one, if we get to the top of an application, you'll see all the settings and when they apply. So here we go. Group policy successfully discovered the domain controller in a certain time frame. Then it found the domain controller, it bound, and then it's applying the information. As it applies the information, it's going to tell you the time frame of what is going on for each individual detail of your group policy. So for example, let's say that you modify a logon script. And when you modify the logon script, for some reason, the logon script now pushes the computer from being available to the user by 2 minutes. Well, you could come in here into this log, apply policy, and then start from the top down and see if the logon script now is taking longer than it did before. And you can toggle that back and forth, just reapply, and the log is going to generate every single time. This is where you can actually optimize the application of policy. So this isn't specifically security, but it certainly is efficiency. And this is one of the ways that you can actually go in and look at how policy is applying in your environment. So this is one of those areas that becomes very important for you to go and clean up. What else should we clean up in our Active Directory environment? Well, let's clean up groups, okay? Now, with regard to groups, we're going to fall into some same categories we did with group policy, but I think it's a little bit different because groups have a much more widespread effect, both for access as well as potentially it can increase the size of your token, causing problems with that. So let's first of all talk about empty groups. So how are we going to find empty groups? Now, if I come back to my Active Directory environment and I go to Active Directory users and computers, this isn't really something that reports easily in Active Directory users and computers. You probably could write a PowerShell script for that, but you'd have to go and discover exactly what that is. You may already have it, and that's fantastic. But if you don't, then you could actually utilize some tools that are designed for this. So I could go here and get a group report, groups without members, and boom, there's my list. A couple of clicks. You didn't have to code anything to get this accomplished. So this is an area where now I can leverage a solution to clean up Active Directory. Now, why would I suggest using a solution instead of PowerShell? When I were to run PowerShell with this, it's going to give me a list. Sure, I have a list now. But most of us as admins, when we run a report, we want a list, and then we want to do something with the list. With PowerShell, you'd have to write more code in order to do that. Here, you don't have to write more code. You can simply select which type of objects you want to do something with, and then you can actually perform actions on those objects. So these are actionable reports, which is a lot different than what you get in PowerShell, which is powerful, but they're not actionable. And they're actually not very pleasant to look at, so you have to do a little bit of manipulation, some formatting of the output in PowerShell to make sure that you make it readable for the people you're giving it to. So this is just one step in making sure that you can clean up your environment. Now, another area is called dynamic groups. And dynamic groups are used maybe more often than you think. You may be using dynamic groups. Many people that I've asked, and I actually posted this on LinkedIn and Twitter, many people responded they were using dynamic groups. Well, what's a dynamic group? If you're not familiar with a dynamic group, let me briefly explain kind of what's going on. So the idea of a dynamic group, and I'm going to jump here to some core settings so you can see them. So I'm going to come over here to an LDF file, right? And I'm going to show you how to modify these dynamic groups. So this is the way that you create a dynamic group. The key thing with a dynamic group is it has a time to live. So the group is created and it only exists for a certain amount of time, and then the group goes away. Obviously, the members go away as well. So the purpose of this is to create a group that only has a certain amount of time that the access for where the group is listed is valid. And then the group goes away and the access goes away. So these groups become very important for organizations that want to give time-sensitive access to users, and then automatically that time goes away. Now, if I come in here, right, I can take this command and I can run this command and create that group. Let me show you what that looks like. So if I come in here and I run ldifty -i -f, and then I point to the actual LDF command that I have, which I put here in this folder, and then I named it dynamic group.ldf. And you will see it's successful. Well, what the heck did it do? Well, what it did is it actually went in to Active Directory and it created, if I do a refresh here, dynamic group. Pretty cool, huh? So that was created on the fly. And as I speak, that group's time to live is clicking down right now. Okay? So if I go into this group and I go to the attributes, you can see that the current time to live is 872. If I go back into this group and go down, you will see that it's reduced. So the actual time that this group is valid is ticking away right now. So the users that are in the group and wherever the group is assigned, they have access. But when the group dies, the time to live dies, the access goes away. So I could really increase this time to live. And this is now, maybe it's a day, maybe it's 2 days. And how do I find these? Well, you can actually write different, you can use PowerShell, you can use saved queries, you could use LDP, you could use a variety of different tools to just query where entry TTL is available for your groups, and you can actually discover any dynamic groups that you have. There may be other ways to do that, but this is the way that I have. I actually had someone come to me and say, I need to know if I have any dynamic groups. So we actually put together an LDAP query. The LDAP query went through, looked for this entry. Because if I do not have, right, let's pick another group. If I have a normal group, there is no time to live. So it's a special attribute for dynamic groups that you can look for. And if the entry exists, it's a dynamic group. If it doesn't exist, it's a normal group. So that's an easy way for you to go in and discover these if you have these dynamic groups. Now, you may need to run this often because the dynamic group may be in another script. They may be created every now and then. So you need to run this a couple of times a day to see if the dynamic group is there to know. But dynamic groups can be a little hidden and they can give access. And they're there sometimes and they're not there other times. So this is an area where maybe you need to investigate how your environment is set up and what's there. Okay? What else do we need to clean up? The cleanup of groups becomes difficult because of group nesting. And group nesting has always been kind of a thorn in our side. So how do we deal with this aspect? Well, what we need is a tool that can give us all of the groups and all of the users that are nested in these groups. So first of all, what I want to do is I want to go in and show you an easy way to do this. You can use PowerShell for this, but I'm going to do it in less clicks and less configuration than you need to use for PowerShell. So I have my group reports, detailed group members, and I can look for users and groups that are nested. And now I can see all of my users. If I were to go to this group, which is administrators, in Active Directory users and computers, and just look at the users that are directly, I only have 2. But you can clearly see inside of the solution that I actually have 8. These are in groups that are nested here. Now, what else do you want to do with this? Well, I think you want to monitor this. I think you want to monitor when a nested group changes membership. How do you do that? I mean, how am I going to know if a user is added to 3 groups down and it modifies what the user has access to because the original group has access? How do you monitor nested groups and when someone's added? Well, that's where AD Audit Plus comes in. And I have pre-configured here, this is not part of the default, but I have pre-configured here the ability for you to see, let's make sure that I have that report, custom reports. Oh, someone deleted it. So I actually had it in there before, but you can actually leverage AD Audit Plus to do this. And if you're interested in that, please email me. This is one of those areas where you can email me and I can send you the step-by-step on how to include nested groups to be monitored so that when any group that's nested in an original group changes membership, you're notified. So that kind of goes back to our original conversation of discussing when we're notified when privilege groups change. So that's possible as well. So let's talk about privilege groups. With privilege groups, you need to clean these up. Okay? I think we've already done most of the legwork for privileged groups in terms of what to do with them. Let's just recap. With your privileged groups, first and foremost, I want you to go in and I want you to document all the privilege groups. You have built-in, service application, and custom. Then I want you to run reports, group nesting with all the users, and then you have to evaluate them to make sure they're all correct, and then go clean them up. That does take a little time. That's not a 5-minute project, okay? But you need to clean up your privileged groups. We need to know who has privileges. Once we have configured them, that's when you start monitoring and alerting when your privileged groups change, which again, we've already gone over that. But certainly privileged groups becomes an important aspect. So that flushes out cleaning up our groups and how to do that. Now let's jump into users. What do we do with users? Well, this is where we get into a lot of the details with users and what attackers are actually leveraging. So let's talk about users that have never logged on, and let's talk about that process. So let's go back in time, and instead of worrying about the users that haven't logged on, let's talk about when you actually created those users, okay? It was a Friday, if I remember correctly, and you received an email. And in the email, it said there are 10 new employees starting on Monday. So you had to create 10 new user accounts and configure them so that on Monday, the users could start. So you went into Active Directory and you started to create the new users, right? So one of them was part of the education OU. So you created user and put in the information, and then you had to give it a password. But you had to create 10, maybe 20 users. So what password did you use here? Many of you are saying, yep, I used the same password. And many of you are saying, well, I used the same password for every new user, and I've done that for 4 years, maybe 5, 6 years, maybe 10 years. So when we create new employees, new user accounts, if we're using the same password, that has a ripple effect, okay? First of all, when I create a user that has a password that's been used for all new users, who in your environment can log on as that account? I think the answer is everyone, right? Because everyone knows what that password is. Now, it is a small amount of time, right? It's from Friday when you create it until Monday morning. That's the only amount of time. So maybe that's the risk reduction that's enough, but I'm not worried about that piece. What I'm worried about is on Monday morning, only 9 of the 10 users started work. One of them didn't start work. Do you have a process in place for HR to contact you and tell you to delete the user account for the user that never came to work? I've only found a couple of organizations in the world that do this. So that means that if you run a query on users that have never logged on, you're going to get a list. And what's the password for all these users? The same. And who knows it? Everyone. And what access do they have? Probably access to everything on your network as a conglomerate between all of them. So here's another action item for you. I don't care how you do it. You can do it with PowerShell, LDAP, whatever it is. Go and get a list of users that have never logged on and clean them up, okay? Secure them. Now, what's the vulnerability here? The vulnerability is the fact that everybody knows the password. So how do you secure these? You go in and you reset the password. Now, it would be nice if I could reset the password for all of them at the same time, but Microsoft does not give you the ability to do that. Again, that's why I point you to more efficient solutions that allow you to do things that you need to do from an efficiency and security standpoint, right? So here are users that have never logged on. I can take the entire list of users and I can reset their password at one time. May sound simple, but if you have 200, 300, 500 users in that list, one at a time, it's going to take you a little bit of time to do that. Use solutions that are going to help you be more efficient. Use solutions that are going to help you create security in a much better way in your environment. This goes a long way, okay? Now, we also need to look for users with non-expiring passwords. This is important because we all know that if users don't reset their password, too many internal, external users are going to be able to try to hack into that account freely forever, and they're going to be able to get in at some point. So make sure you do that. Of course, Active Directory users, computer saved queries has that, as well as depending on which solution you put in place, I have a report here of users that have accounts that never expire. Okay, accounts that never expire, and then I have an accounts where their password never expires. So being able to get that list is very important. Inactive users, okay? This is where we can do a little bit of automation too. So inactive users, what does that mean? What is an active user? Well, I want you to be able to be dynamic with this based on your environment. So here you see that I have an automation built for deprovisioning users securely. And inside of my automation, I have inactive users. Here's where you need flexibility. You need to be able to specify what that means and who that doesn't apply to. So this becomes important for you to rule out, exclude certain users, as well as make sure that you have only the users targeted that you want to look at. This allows you to do that. You can do it with PowerShell, not nearly as easy and elegant as you can do here. Now, many of us want to perform multiple actions when we deprovision and clean up. So that's where I can come in here and I can specify the actions that I want to take. I'm going to move the user to a protected OU. I'm going to disable the user. I don't want to delete the user yet because I may need that user's information and that account to get access to it. So now I can automate this particular cleanup. So not only do we need to do cleanup, if we can automate the process, that's even better, okay? Now, I have two more areas here that I want to talk about, and both of these came to me 2 weeks ago from a customer, and they wanted to know if this was possible. So I went and investigated, and of course, it is possible, and I want to show you the results. Let me talk about both of these. I'm going to talk about the last one first. The organization had privileged access workstations, PAWs, and they wanted to know if someone with privileges, right? You have that list, remember? If one of those users logs into a non-PAW, so they log into just a workstation. So the ability to monitor where the logon occurs and then evaluate who logged on and if they have group membership in one of these groups. So I actually have that inside of my SIM. So right here inside of AD Audit Plus, I have created a report for, get to my reports here, for when a privileged user, an admin logon history, and then I also have one when a user logs on to a machine that is a privileged user. So I call that IT logon to the wrong computer. So what these are set up to do is evaluate all logons based on the user, evaluate which groups they're in, and if that user is in a privileged group, notify you. That's pretty awesome, okay? Those are the types of things that you can do with your SIM, giving you clear indication of when users are doing things they shouldn't be doing. But this one, the other one, was a little bit more complex. They wanted to know when a privileged user is configured for a service account, okay? That's difficult because they had over 2,000 servers, and trying to discover that was difficult. So what I said is, why not just look at all logons, because all service accounts need a logon, and then if it's a service that logged them on, evaluate which groups they're in, and then indicate, hey, this service account was from that. Same thing in my SIM, I can do that. So here you can see that I have the ability to look for when service accounts are in the admin group, and I can view that report, and you can clearly see that when any user that's logging on as a service is in a privileged group, I'm getting a report and I can be notified of that. Here, I think the report is the most important thing because the immediate notification isn't as critical as cleaning up the environment. Once you clean it up, now you get an alert and now you get that information. So these are some things, some details that I highly recommend you investigate. Some of them go really deep and flush out information that's almost impossible to see without a solid SIM solution. But with a solid SIM solution that's easy to configure, you can set up all of these reports and alerts in no time, giving you a streamlined access into what's going on. So today, we've gone over what I consider to be quite a bit of information. We started off talking about insider attacks, and we also talked about how you can clean up Active Directory from an efficiency and security standpoint. When we're cleaning up or we're talking about insider attacks, what I wanted to do is I wanted you to have the ability to remove false positives. By removing false positives, you're getting a clear indication of when you're under attack. This is really important, okay? And I gave you a variety of different views on how to do that with local groups, privileged groups, logons, service accounts, many different areas. And then we jumped into UBA, which gave you even more detailed information from your SIM. We also talked about in our last section, areas around cleanup. We cleaned up group policy, we cleaned up users, and we cleaned up groups for a variety of different reasons. And some of those we really dove in deep on how to do that in your SIM solution. So I hope this was very valuable to you. You see here my email address. Marcus mentioned earlier about the email address that you can send your questions to. I think Marcus is going to come up and recap some of that information. I want to thank you for my time and being invited back here to Stockholm, and hopefully I'll be invited back again. And please send us your emails.
Yeah, thank you very much, Derek.
Absolutely.
Nice to have you here today.
It's very nice.
Sharing your insights. And thank you very much for watching this webcast with us. Please visit invit.st. We have more upcoming webinar or webcasts or events and other resources like ebooks on our Knowledge Hub and our blog. So please go there as well. And thank you very much for watching it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yep.